And then I guess it's also worth pointing out that even when the adults checked, it doesn't sound like they did like a super great job checking. Like they kind of just poked their head in the room and they didn't actually visually confirm that like the children were in their beds. So,
Oh yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
yeah, there were some weird clues. Like sometimes the door was more wide open and there was like this. Here's the other thing is they seem to have put a lot of faith in like the window. So this apartment, the bedroom that the kids were in was right by the front door and it had also a window that was facing the street.
Welcome. You are listening to the Solvable Mysteries podcast, episode number 20. This is our, I guess, second milestone episode for us. So, my name is Yuras, and as usual, I'm joined by my co host from America, Glenn Heiko. How are you, man?
Hi, happy holidays. Just getting over Christmas over here.
Right. I don't know why I mentioned that you're from America, but I guess I just felt like it. So, how was the holidays like for you, man?
Oh, it was okay, pretty busy. We barbecued a brisket and American style. That means you're cooking it for like 12 hours. So we started at 3 in the morning. It was our second time doing this in like less than a week.
Interesting. So, who woke up for that?
Both of us. I mean, we had to both go and work the. We have a pellet grill, and yeah, it was a lot of work, and it turned out okay though. It's pretty
I
good.
see. I mean, I had like a pretty, I guess, regular, Christmas here in Lithuania. Nothing special, nothing out of the ordinary. The weather was really weird this year. We had warm rain, so it was like, it was like above, it was like 5 degrees Celsius, and it was like a weird, wet Christmas. You know what I'm saying? We had no snow all week, so I guess I felt like a Californian a little bit.
Yeah, I think we literally had the same weather because we had like for us was really unseasonably cold and windy and rainy like
Hmm.
Belize like Central American kind of rain,
Yeah.
but like cold. Yeah, flooding.
So it evened out, right? I mean, okay, but that's not, I guess, the point of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you are seeing her image right now on the screen. So Madeleine Beth McCann disappeared on the evening of May 3rd in 2007 from her bed in a holiday apartment at a resort in Praia da Luz in the Algarve region of Portugal. I'm just gonna quickly get the Google Earth on this. Right, so this is essentially the resort that they were staying, and I guess the yellow pin marks the apartment building where Madeleine was, I guess, sleeping on that, I guess, evening of May 3rd in 2007. So her whereabouts to this day still remain unknown. And the Daily Telegraph, I believe that's a UK media outlet, described this disappearance as the most heavily reported missing persons case in modern history. So I guess it was just a matter of time before we actually decided to do an episode on this case, don't you think?
Yeah, it was sort of like the John Bonet of Europe in a way.
I mean, probably the John Benet of the
More,
world. You could almost
yeah,
say, you know what I'm saying, because like American media outlets have been reporting, I guess, this disappearance as well.
yeah. It had like some would say it had an outsized media impact on, I guess, like you said, global consciousness.
Exactly. So yeah, essentially, the little girl that you are seeing right here. Wait, let me just bring up her image again. So she was 3 years old at the time that she disappeared, and I guess you could see why the media was really interested in this case. She almost looks like she could win like beauty pageants. You know what I'm saying? Like she's definitely. I mean, I feel like once the reporters heard of this story, they thought they found a gold mine. Don't you think?
Yeah, I think when I was doing the research, I was reading that the European papers figured out that every time they put this case on their cover, they sold an extra 30,000 copies for the day. So literally, there were
Jesus.
some months, there were some months where it was just every day they had something on the cover, and it was almost like maybe the early version of Clickbait. Like now, we're so used to Clickbait on online publishers and these kind of incendiary articles and video titles and things like that. But this was like, I guess, the transition period from that happening for newspapers to, I guess, leading into what we see today on online.
I see, because some I read somewhere that I guess this case sort of filled a void after the death of Diana, Princess Diana of England, and it happened, I guess, I believe in the late 90s. So this case was sort of like filled that void for I guess, the society in the UK to have something like to be outraged about, and something to like try to find out the truth, and I guess this was like the next big thing, I guess, in the UK. So especially in 2007, around that general time, I don't think there was any I don't think there were any other interesting missing persons cases for say, or at least on such a scale. And I guess in terms of all the details that we're going to be discussing about this disappearance, I don't think that there has been a case like that where you really have a lot of suspects, a lot of different theories, and I can't wait to get into all of them.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good point, especially the way the British media have always been. That they've been very like gossipy and about incendiary news. So I guess it makes sense that this is almost like Princess Di Part 2.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I'll quickly read my notes real quick, so just to give our audience, I guess, a little background. So Madeleine was on a holiday from the UK, so she was from the UK, and she was with her parents, Kate and Gary McCann. So I'm just gonna bring up these people image right now. Right. So she also had siblings. So she had twins. I believe it was a boy and a girl, and they were like a year younger than her. So the twins were like at 2 year olds. Yeah, they were like 2 year olds. And also the family, the McCann family, went with a group of friends and their children as well. So I believe there was like, including the McCann family, there were, I believe, 7 grown-ups and 8 children in total, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, apparently this was a trip that they had done a couple of years in a row at that point.
I see. Yeah, and let me just quickly check everything else. So yeah, basically Madeleine and her, I guess, 2 twin siblings had been asleep on that May 3rd, 2007 night, and I believe they went to bed somewhere around 8:30, and they were essentially staying at the ground level apartments. Let me just bring those up once again. So At around 8:30, I guess the McCanns put their kids to bed, and they went out to a dinner date with the other group of people that they were traveling to Portugal with. And if I'm not mistaken, wait, crap. No, everything's fine. If I'm not mistaken, this area right here, come on, Google Images, don't don't do this to me. Right, I believe this was the restaurant area where they were staying, because I read that they wanted a restaurant so that they could, I guess, see their apartment from, something like that,
Yeah,
right?
so the restaurant is actually like catty corner from it. So that's this building over there to the bottom left of your screen. That's
So,
the restaurant.
okay, so this one, right?
So no, just go right. See where the pool is?
Yep.
Go to the bottom left of the pool, right there. That
Oh,
building right
oh
there.
yeah, yeah,
No,
definitely.
just a little bit over to the left. Yeah. So keep going. Yeah, right there.
Okay, perfect.
So yeah, that's why they thought so. They'd made some kind of habit. This was like their nightly habit, and they made they their habits were very predictable because they'd been doing this for many nights in a row, where every night they put the kids to sleep by themselves in this apartment, and they thought it was so safe because they could see it, and it was only, I guess, as the crow flies, about 50 meters. But then to actually get to it was this whole weird convoluted path of like having to go out onto the road again, and then along the side, and then get back into the deck. And I
I
guess they
see.
would leave. Yeah, they would leave that whole sliding door patio unlocked, while the front door and the window of the
Hmm.
bed were locked. So they thought it was safe. They thought, hey, we can kind of see. Now, unfortunately, they couldn't really see everything. They could only really see kind of the top half of the patio area, so they couldn't really see the doorway. But yeah, they made this habit of you know all the kids are asleep in the apartments, and then the adults are busy eating and drinking at this restaurant every night.
Yeah, so the restaurant was the Tapas restaurant, right? So the media dubbed the whole, I guess, group of family and friends the Tapas Seven. So those were the grown-ups, and these guys had a really strange. I mean, I don't know what do you even call this, because I wouldn't call this like taking care of your kids properly. They had like a system where they would all leave their kids, I guess. And just before we move forward, like everyone from the Tapas Seven, they all stayed in this apartment complex, right? Or was it not the case?
Yeah, I think like some of the other adults had their families in like adjacent apartments or upstairs
But
apartments.
somewhere nearby,
Yeah,
right? So I mean,
same
everyone,
building basically.
right? So everyone from like the people who attended this group of people who attended the restaurant, every 30 minutes someone from the group would like go through all of the apartments and check on the kids, and all of the apartment buildings had their doors unlocked. So I mean, I don't know, man, like this, I mean, when you're in Portugal, I guess, and the weather is so nice, you sort of forget about like real life dangers or something like that, because this to me like sounds crazy. Like once I
Yeah,
was researching it, like I, I just don't know how, like, and all of these people were doctors, by the way. They're not like, people who are necessarily, don't have jobs or live off welfare and things like that. Like these people are like, doctors with like high educations, and I think they should know better than that. But I don't know what the situation was, but to me it just seems really weird.
yeah, it's disturbing because I mean, like you said, so both of the parents were doctors, and then like you said, I think several of the adults, if not all of them, were also physicians. They'd met each other at like different hospitals that they had worked at. So
Yeah.
the father's a cardiologist, the mother's a GP, a general physician, and like these are the people that, in their day job, they're responsible for reporting things like neglect and child abuse. But the way that they did their vacation sounds like borderline child neglect or abuse, especially leaving several toddlers alone in an unlocked room with no supervision. I mean, this is like in an era right now where people are buying like video baby monitors and things that, you can like basically the Ring for your kid, where you can watch your kid at all times on your cell phone. They didn't really have that back then yet, but like, you know what I mean? This isn't like the 1980s or 70s or, where people were doing kind of like free range child rearing.
Exactly.
It seems like definitely like they took some kind of calculated risk, and I guess we'll see what happens when you take a calculated risk with your most valuable possession.
I mean, yeah, definitely that. But the other thing, like before we started rolling, you mentioned that this happened. For something like that to happen in 2007, that's like pretty crazy because things like this were like typical to leave your kids, I guess, unattended back in like the 80s or 70s, right? But not in like 2000s, because like at that point you already had like all of those, I guess, cases where kids just go missing or get abducted and then found dead somewhere by the river. So especially, I believe the Ben Needham case was already had already happened. So Ben Needham, if you remember, I can't like tell you which episode it was, but I definitely remember it being like somewhere in the late 90s when that happened. So yeah, this was like almost 10 years after the fact. So you had like another kid who went missing in Greece because he was playing around unattended, and then no one, found his remains or anything like that. So, I mean, I feel like they should have had some more, I guess, you know what I'm saying, like more
Yeah,
care for their kids at that point.
yeah, more caution. I mean, here's two other things to point out. One is the apartment is right next to a pool, so that's an unlocked door with the child, and that's an age where kids can definitely crawl out of bed or crawl out of a crib. I should know because our toddler, who was under 1.5, did exactly that for a crib that was supposedly completely proofed against that. No, guess what? Kids find a way. So a kid could have easily wandered out and gotten drowned in the pool, depending on kind of what the barriers are between the room and the pool. And I don't really know what the laws are there in Portugal, but I know here in California they had to enact some pretty stringent legislation because literally it's really common for kids to drown in a pool. But here's the other thing is, same point, a kid crawls out of the crib and gets hurt. Okay, now it's like half an hour between when that happened and when someone actually finds the kid, and God knows what happens, in that period. Like if someone had turned up at at the ER or the hospital where these parents worked, and that had happened, was that, oh, my kid fell out of the crib, and I guess she was probably crying for half an hour, but we were over drinking at the bar, you know
Oh yeah.
50 yards away, so we didn't know. Like, that would have been reported to the police. So that's kind of interesting to me that when they were not in Britain, they decided, like, to your point, that, oh,
Mhm.
different rules, we're going to behave in a different way.
I mean, yeah, definitely. That's a weird way to handle your kids, especially if I'm sure they had like ran into similar situations of kids disappearing, or at least kids getting injured or hurt because of the parents neglecting them or something like that. They must have heard these stories working in the medical field, and to not have that sort of care, or like, I don't know, like, not put a conscious effort to make sure that the kids are all right. Because I don't know, man, like all of the doctors that I ran into, they seem like a little bit like overkill in terms of how protective they are of everything. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you just have a few more cuffs than usual, they want to check that out. You know what I'm saying? So like,
Yeah.
these were like interesting, I guess, physicians. And I believe Kate was a physician and Gary was a some sort of a specialist in the medical field. But I've heard that.
He was a cardiologist.
Oh yeah, yeah. So that's definitely a, so that definitely that that's I don't know how to describe that, but a cardiology is like I guess, a medical field that is definitely difficult to master. And I've read that he was actually a specialist that was in demand back in the UK. They lived in, I believe it was Leith. I don't know if it was Leicester, because they have like this pretty big city, but I'm not sure if I'm describing it correctly. So it was I guess a fairly big city in the UK. And he was a medical specialist in demand there. So you would probably expect something more from people of this status.
Yeah, yeah, it's like very odd behavior. The other thing that I found disturbing, this all came out after the thing that happened, but there've been kind of this neighborhood that they're staying in is known as like Little Britain, because it's got a high number of British tourists and British expatriates who run businesses there. There's just a lot of British tourism in the area. Apparently, it's just one of those places where, I guess due to close proximity to England, relatively, and being on the Mediterranean, there were a lot of British folks there. But just to that point, though, it seemed like there were a lot of people preying on these tourists, and I found that kind of disturbing when I was reading. Like there was a just in between, like people doing burglaries, people doing like sexual assaults, including against children, and then kind of all these minor con artists going door to door collecting like donations for orphanages that didn't exist. There was a
Oh
lot of
yeah.
that, including like I think the same week or the same day that all this happened. Like it kind of made me wonder, like, gosh, Portugal, when bad things happen to tourists, that doesn't really help out like your tourism business. So like people don't like to go on vacation and get victimized. And I think this
Yeah.
when we look at this, there's going to be a lot of embarrassment by the Portuguese government around a lot of different things in this case. But yeah, I mean, like there's sort of like this environment where there seems like there's a lot of weird, seedy characters looking to prey on tourists, which I think makes it all the more shocking that they left their children alone for long stretches at a time in an unlocked room.
Right. I mean, okay. So a few details that I guess we need to mention before we move forward. So it was not a situation that just like they were not trying out this method. So apparently this method of like checking up on the kids with the open apartment, building doors, and one of the grown-ups going through all of the apartments every like 30 minutes and checking up on the kids. It sounds like a crazy ass idea to me. Like I'd be like, what are you smoking? If someone like suggested having this sort of security measure in place for the kids. But whatever, it appears that they have been doing this for the whole week. So it was a situation that they just thought that we'll just do it again this time. And I don't know what the hell were they thinking, especially given the fact that the I guess apartment building complex, which was like something like a motel, a restaurant, a hotel. It was an unorthodox, I guess, vacation tourism complex, something like that. So I guess it was really like relaxed and chill. So but they actually offered I guess child care services or something like that, where they would have like nannies go and check up on the kids. So I don't know why you don't order that. You know what I'm saying? Especially given the fact
Yeah.
that you are staying on an apartment that you are seeing right now on the map. It's fairly easy to get into, right? Especially like from the back. It's like these. I guess it's what I'm trying to say, that it seems that it's easy to enter these apartments, and then it's also easy to hide. You know what I'm saying? Like there are a lot of alleyways, a lot of places you could just hide in the bushes or something like that. So I guess for people, for like thieves or child kidnappers, this seems like a perfect spot to maybe abduct someone or at least burglarize an apartment. So anyways, I think that was just an important detail to mention, and I guess we can get into the actual night, the actual day on the disappearance. So allegedly, the parents of Madeleine McCann, so Kate and Gary, they decided to leave the 5A apartment building on 8:30 in the evening. So basically, they left to go on their usual dining situation with their friends. That happened in this, I guess, tapas restaurant right here. And right, I'm just reading right now that the 5A apartment actually laid about 55 meters from the restaurant. So I guess they thought that 55 meters was close enough. You know what I'm saying? But at the same time, like, you're not you don't have any actual visuals of what's actually happening in the apartment. You know what I'm trying to say? So
Yeah.
it just seems like weird. Like it doesn't matter how far away you are from the building. If it's unlocked, I'd still feel uneasy, you know, and having a situation where like every 30 minutes someone's gonna go check up on the kids while I, you know, just enjoy myself and have a few drinks doesn't seem like a situation I'd be willing to be a part of. You know what I'm saying? If my kids are somewhere in sleeping in an unlocked apartment in a foreign country, that just seems a little out there, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. It sort of boggles the mind. I mean, I don't know what was so important about like going and getting tanked up on booze every night and eating that it was worth, taking
Yeah,
this sort of limited risk with their toddlers.
exactly. So this is an interesting infographic, I guess. So yeah, so as you can see, like this actually provides us a good sort of plan, I guess, more information on how like the logistics of this case actually of their, you know, situation happened. So both the Wilkins and the Tanner's apartments were in the same building complex. So, you know, the Wilkins family and the Tanner family were part of the group of people who were dining at the Tapas bar. And I'm reading here that right, so everything was right. So I guess at 10 past 9 p.m., Gary, the father of Madeleine, he actually leaves the flat and meets Wilkins at the top of the alleyway. So yeah, as you mentioned before, like getting to the apartments was, I guess, a little bit of a hassle because you had to, like, you know, go out into the street, and it was a, I guess, an interesting building layout in the apartment complex. Then at 15 past 9, Tanner, so one of the persons who were dining with the, I guess, McCann family, walks past the alleyway to her flat and sees a man carrying a child, but Wilkins says he didn't see the man or Tanner. So, you know, I guess we'll get into that man who carried a child, because it was a pretty big, I guess, detail in the case. And then at 25 past 9, Gary arrives back at the Tapas bar. So I guess there's like a 15 minute, I guess, time, I don't know, man, like a time frame or something like that, where Gary's unattended for. So, you know, I think 15 minutes is a little bit long to walk past, you know, to like walk 55 meters to the Tapas bar. But, you know, who knows what actually, maybe Gary like took a little detour or something like that. Right, so I'm looking at some other images right here. I'm trying to find the exact time when Kate McCann ran into the Tapas bar and announced that Madeleine was missing. I believe it was 10, right? It was 10 in the evening. Let me just quickly check my notes.
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing here. So, and then I guess it's also worth pointing out that even when the adults checked, it doesn't sound like they did like a super great job checking. Like they kind of just poked their head in the room and they didn't actually visually confirm that like the children were in their beds. So,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah.
yeah, there were some weird clues. Like sometimes the door was more wide open, and there was like this. Here's the other thing: is they seem to have put a lot of faith in like the window. So this apartment, the bedroom that the kids were in, was right by the front door, and it had also a window that was facing the street that had these big metal security shutters that supposedly could only be opened from the inside. And I'll just say that like I don't ever trust, especially after seeing a lot of videos on YouTube of how people can open up locks and other things like just that supposedly are completely thief proof. I don't have a lot of faith that anything is thief proof. So yeah,
Hmm.
there was a lot of like faith placed into like these security barriers on the street side that were not
These
necessarily.
walls,
Yeah,
right? Like something like that, right?
yeah, and the doors on that side, and it's like, okay, well, you know
I feel like if you had the ladder, you could like you don't even need a ladder. Like you could probably just.
yeah, just hop that thing. Yeah,
Oh yeah. I mean,
yeah.
the security definitely seems not to be quite there. So I'm just looking at the general vicinity, I guess. So this is where like the Tapas bar was located. So this area right here, around somewhere, and the Google Earth is getting distorted at this point. But yeah, so just to give just a general feel of how the area actually looked. I mean, the one thing I'm noticing immediately is the amount of alleyways in the general area, because it seems to me that it's actually a perfect place for thieves. Like people with like low incomes could probably not afford to stay in a place like this. Like right next to the ocean, in these like fancy little cottages, I guess. So for a thief, this is a perfect place to like go and rob people. You know what I'm saying? Because you essentially have a large population of rich people staying in poorly secured apartments, and the streets are filled with alleyways and corners where you could hide easily. So, you
Yeah,
know,
you could just dash right down. Like you could turn two corners, and nobody would ever know that you had anything to do with what was going on there. And then it also is pretty close to the beach, so if you had a boat waiting for you, you could very easily get a child over to the beach and off, and off into international waters before anybody even knew anything.
exactly. I mean, in terms of the beach, you do have like these little mountain, I guess, ridges right here. So it would probably be a little bit hard to dock a boat undetected, but maybe somewhere around like the corner or something like that, you could definitely try to do that. So it's right. So it looks, and another thing that we need to mention is that there had been like robberies, I believe, in the same apartment building, like a few months prior to the disappearance of Madeleine. There were like an increase of like robberies and thieves and that whole situation with like people asking money for a fake charity and stuff like that. So there were like scams going on around this area. So people were definitely trying to like, I guess, do shady stuff around the general vicinity. And I've read somewhere that even the police officers, the police investigative crew from the UK, they actually found out that there were like a lot of interesting phone calls. I mean, they couldn't really know the contents of the phone calls, but like a lot of, I guess, early suspects in this case, they actually made a lot of phone calls in this area on the night of the disappearance. So it leads me to believe that there was some shady stuff going on, definitely.
Seems like it's a weird, especially when some of the other suspects come into this case that they looked at that lived nearby. It's like a strange epicenter of like just like to your point, a lot of affluent people who seem like easy victims. And then meanwhile, what were the Portuguese police doing? Like, did they ever think like, maybe this would be a good place to have an officer make some patrols, or pay attention to all these weirdos? It kind of seems like they were operating on the cheap. Like they're like, let's let these rich tourists pay all this money, and then if stuff happens, oh well, they're going to be gone next week.
I mean, to that end, you probably can't, catch all the thieves, especially in a place like Portugal. I've heard somewhere that Portugal, actually has a fairly substantial crime rate. It's not necessarily the safest country in Europe. You definitely don't hear Portugal getting praised for its safety or anything like that, like some countries do. So I guess it's a place where bad things do tend to happen. So, right, I'm just trying to find out, right, if there's any other interesting details in terms of the actual night of the disappearance are interesting, and I feel like we pretty much covered them. Also, at around 10 in the evening, Kate McCann actually runs to the Tapas 7, I guess, the people that were dining at the restaurant, and she pretty much screams, "They took her!" So I guess that's an interesting part for me, because, like, why would she say they took her?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. I mean,
what did
I
she
was
have in mind by saying they? Like, would you say, like, is this like a natural thing to say when someone goes missing? You don't know what happened, but then you say they took her, or not like she's gone, or like I can't find my daughter, but like they took her. That's
yeah.
interesting.
That's the same thing where it's like, I mean, even if you were gonna, this the only thing I was thinking about that might kind of explain it was, like, she wasn't sure what the gender was of who it was. So sometimes people, like, you know what I mean, like they say they or their when it's not
Mm,
really like gender appropriate. It's like a sort of a grammatically incorrect way to
I don't
to,
think
to generalize in English, but yeah, I don't
in
know. Yeah, it was weird.
2007. I don't think they
They were
had.
so focused on it. Yeah, it just
Yeah,
was sort of like it seemed like it was jumping to a conspiracy already, instead of like, yeah, like how do you know she didn't want her off? But like, yeah, I guess when she goes, she finds like the door wide open, and that security window I was talking about, that thing's wide open, and she just comes to the conclusion that, like, hey, like, it looks like um all the doors are open, and it looks like there's been some kind of burglar.
exactly. I mean, so this is we are looking at the room where she was staying. So I assume the toddlers, the two twins. I mean, they were all toddlers, but like the twins were staying in these separate protective, I guess, beds, and then you had Madeline in her own little bed. Right. Let me just. Right. So these are actually some good pictures of the actual room. Right, yeah, perfect. So this is basically the bed that she was staying. So I guess once Kate actually entered this room, she actually saw that the doors were actually open to this room. The door was actually opened a little bit more than they actually remember leaving the door open, like, how narrow they left it open. Because, and that another interesting fact, I believe there was like this window right here was also opened a little bit, right, if I'm not mistaken. So there was, like, I guess, street light or something like that going inside the room. So once she entered the 5A apartment, she allegedly noticed that something was wrong immediately, right? So I guess she went out into this apartment, and then she saw that Madeline was not there. But this is where, like, I guess one of the craziest, I guess, things to me in this case, and I actually didn't see this reported or anything like that, but I saw people making these points in some of the other YouTube videos in the comment section on YouTube, that why would she, if your daughter is missing and you have like two twins in the same apartment that your daughter just went missing from, why would you leave them and run 55 meters into the Tapas, I guess, bar slash restaurant to alert everyone else and leave the two twins alone? Like, that doesn't, add up to me. Like, if someone went missing, you would at least try to call, I don't know, man, like have some sort of hotel or like apartment personnel to like watch over the kids and try to find them, and not just run into your, group of family friends and scream they took her, when and leave your like two like 2-year old twins at the same room, like
Yeah,
at least for like the next 5 minutes, or like maybe even 10 minutes. I don't know like how fast they actually returned back, but it just seems crazy to me. Like, why would you do that? What if you come back and now those two twins are kidnapped as well?
yeah. I mean, it's true. I mean, the only defense I have for that is I've seen personally people do stupid stuff like that when they're panicking. So when someone's panicking,
Okay.
sometimes, yeah, they just completely lose their heads, and I mean, it's, like I said, I mean, it's what you say totally makes sense. Like, if someone had just robbed the bank vault and took half the money, you wouldn't like turn your back on the half full vault and go walk down the street to call the police. Like, you would have
Exactly.
someone watch the vault. But yeah, I mean, the other thing is they've all been, drinking half the night already. So that it makes me wonder how good a job anybody was doing checking on the children or any of the other stuff going on. I mean, the other thing is, even when I look at those like cribs that you were showing in the picture, it's like, once again, these are doctors that should know that, like this is like in an era where like sudden infant sudden infant death syndrome and stuff like that is really well known, and like a valid concern. And I'll just tell you that, with my own child, we had a couple of like scary things that happen, around like the crib and things like that. And it's like, it boggles my mind how cavalier they were about this. But yeah, I mean, so she goes, and yeah, she goes screaming off to the restaurant, and then kind of like the response of both the hotel and the police and all the authorities is, once again, I think, and this is once again, this is probably, you called out, I'm from America. Maybe this is where like I get to put in my 2 cents as like an entitled, like ugly American, is that like, yeah, I mean, I think the expectation probably coming from the U.S. or from Britain is that when you ring the alarm bell on something, that you think is serious, that everybody kind of snaps to attention, because that's sometimes what happens in some places. And this shows that it didn't really seem like they had their act together. Like, it took them like 20 minutes to do their lost child protocol, and this is a place with a pool. So it's like, okay, somebody should be checking the pool right away. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
These are like golden minutes. And then once they kind of called their version of the local police, they didn't really do a good job of like calling like the private company that was monitoring the roads, and like a whole bunch of other folks. Like, that was one of the big criticisms, and I guess maybe this is why the Portuguese authorities got defensive, is that it kind of was like the equivalent here. Like, the equivalent in the U.S. is, like, even the John Bonet thing we talked about, because they almost never had murders. Even they were kind of rusty as far as what to do, and this
Yeah.
was like in kind of a well-funded American city. So like, it's not unusual that here in the U.S., like a very small town, and like maybe like the U.S. version of Portugal, like a state that maybe isn't as affluent and has a higher crime rate, their local law enforcement will be a little more lackadaisical and a little less professional, and then it'll look really bad when all of a sudden like the federal authorities, like the FBI, come in and say, hey, like, did you do this, did you do that? And they're like, oh, well, I don't know how to do that. But like, yeah, that's it. I have to ask you, Russ, is there like,
Yeah.
does Interpol, like, is there an EU version of the FBI? Like, is there some kind of like oversight authority that kind of comes in and kicks ass when it's time to get serious?
I don't think we have like a institution like the FBI in terms of like, everyone being like connected into this one police force. I think that logistically that would not work because of the language barrier. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Because like most of the senior, I guess, highly experienced investigators, not all of them, speak fluent English, so it would be a hard time communicating. But just researching this case, and just in general, I know that the UK the Scotland Yard is like a fairly high level investigative, I guess, agency from the UK. So I guess they're one of the best in the world, actually. So that institution got involved, and it seemed like they did a heck of a better job than the Portugal police did, at least
Yeah, that
initially, right?
yeah, but then even there, and that's a good segue into highlighting some of those difficulties you mentioned. So it wasn't just like language difficulties where like the Portuguese police were trying to take down witness statements and have the parents sign up to like what they said happened, and basically like the parents are signing pieces of paper that say things in Portuguese that someone else is having to translate into English for them, but like it's just like a really awkward process. And then like the British authorities, the police departments that came in to offer help, they're using like these like state of the art computerized systems. And frankly, just as an aside, I've heard that even Britain is behind the US in terms of like how unified those systems are. So while in the US there is actually a pretty far-reaching unified system across the states now to track criminals and fingerprints and things like that, Britain doesn't really have that. So even their computer tech is behind. But like Portugal didn't have that. Portugal had boxes and files. So like it was kind of the equivalent of like maybe a backwater, sheriff in Alabama trying to work with like the FBI
Yeah,
on like a case, and
yeah,
yeah, just but like the added complication of a language difference and cultural difference. And then meanwhile the the British police are just trying really hard not to offend the Portuguese police and to seem too patronizing. So they're trying to like they're kind of going along with whatever the Portuguese police say, even when the Portuguese police start saying things that they don't necessarily agree with, like
mm,
when they start pointing at the parents, and the
right,
British police were like, well, you didn't really question these other 100 people on the list yet, so are you just trying to take the easy route,
right.
that kind of thing.
I
Yeah.
mean, I guess this is a time for us to get into the suspects and
Look at
like,
that photo.
yeah, I mean,
Wow.
and just in general, like, what do we think that actually had happened? So, since we covered like the general gist of what went down, I guess the main suspects for the longest time, I guess the main suspect was this man who was seen by, let me just bring up the sighting by one of the Tapas 7, right? So wait, who saw that man? I'm just trying to quickly go through the
Was it
notes.
Tanner? Was this the Tanner one, or was this
Yep,
the guy
yep,
that headed towards the beach?
exactly. It was the Tanner sighting, so it happened at 9:15. Let me just quickly find that for us. And yeah, so essentially, one of the people who were, part of the group of people dining there, they actually, on their way to check on the kids, they actually saw a man who was allegedly carrying a child, away from the building complex, and the child was allegedly asleep, and the child was wearing pajamas, similar to the ones that I guess Madeleine McCann was wearing on the night of the disappearance. So for the longest time, for multiple years, this man was like, the center of investigations all around the world. All the agencies that were trying to help out, everyone was like trying to figure out who this man was, because they didn't have any footage of it. They didn't have anything but like Jane Tanner allegedly saw him, and yeah, so he was the main focus of attention in terms of like who the investigative authorities were trying to locate. And I believe they actually find out who this man was like a few years later, right? And they actually found that he was carrying his own child, and he actually provided I guess proof by showing the pajamas that, after like 6 years, when they actually locate this man, he actually shows the pajamas, and they actually see that everything checks out, and this guy is no longer a suspect. So yeah, so for the longest of time, they had like, the wrong person they were trying to investigate, and for multiple years they were on the wrong track. And at that point, to solve that case, at that point it was really hard. So Yeah, like, do you have any more information on the Tanner side?
No, not in that. Just that, like to your point, the British police, even I think before that, had decided it was a red herring. That it was just, by that I mean just something that was distracting away from
Hmm.
what was the more important part of it. And I think there was also a similar sighting where there was somebody. I think it's the Smith sighting,
Yep, I have it.
where
I have
yeah,
it
where once
already.
again somebody saw somebody carrying somebody to the beach, and they said the person looked uncomfortable carrying the child. But then the crazy part was the same witness later saw later on, and this was something that was kind of suppressed because it was so embarrassing. The same person saw the father carrying one of the other children from the plane, like later on after the whole case is broken, and said, "Oh yeah, that's the guy." And they're like, "Okay, well that's the guy carrying his own kid down the plane, maybe down from the plane. Maybe you're a little biased in terms of what you think is a person uncomfortable carrying a child.
Yeah.
Like it was
Maybe
it
you don't
didn't.
have any kids, you know what I'm saying? Maybe you
Yeah,
never like held a child before, but yeah, makes sense. And I guess these
yeah,
various sightings that didn't really lead to anywhere were like the main sources of, like, I guess, to what the Scotland Yard needs to investigate, or the Portugal authorities need to investigate. But actually, once the UK authorities flew in to Portugal, I believe like 3 weeks after the disappearance, they actually had their dogs search the apartment.
yeah.
And this is actually where things get really interesting for me, because the dogs, let me just quickly find an image. But the dogs actually found, I guess these dogs were like trained to immediately bark when they sense blood, and they started barking all over the apartment, and then started barking as well at the McCann vehicle that they
Yeah,
rented out. So that was interesting.
one of them was specifically a cadaver dog, so it was tuned. It was trained to detect, I guess, the smells from dead bodies. Now here's the issue I have. So yeah, like to your point, they sort of signaled on a couple different spots. They signaled, like, I think, in
Around the
one part of
couch
the
area, right?
yeah, the couch area, and then in the trunk of the car. And it's like, here's the thing. So, like, unfortunately, the everything the dog does is binary, right? It's either it reacts or it doesn't, but it can't, like, if there's something going on in the spectrum where the dog's like, hey, there's a lot of weird smells here, and it kind of smells like this or that, or like the dog can't give you like like any kind of specific feedback. The dog can only the dog can just either bark or not bark, but it can't tell you a more complex answer, a more like specific answer. So what I kind of wonder about that is people pointed out, like, well, these are physicians that deal with, like, people that are dying or potentially dead bodies, and where they work. They've been throwing their clothes in the back of their car, or some of their travel stuff might have strange smells on it. And then my own thought is, it's an apartment that gets rented out to tourists all the time, so, like, it may be a weird combination of smells going through there. It's
Right.
it's unfortunate that, like, we don't have a way to talk to dogs and ask them, like, well, what exactly are you smelling, like.
Yeah, but like this is like a low resolution, like, I guess, infographic that I'm reading. But like, you're pretty much probably can't see or make out what is, I guess, written in here. But like, I'm reading here that Kila, one of the dogs, actually saved over 200,000 pounds nationally, and had helped investigations all over the UK. So it was an experienced and reliable dog. And then Eddie, the other dog, the recovery dog, has been a veteran of over 200 homicide cases.
Huh.
So I mean, I guess reading this right now makes me think that these dogs were actually really credible. It would be, it actually would. These were not like your typical, I guess, dogs, like, even like typical police dogs. I believe these were like the cream of the crop in terms of, like, investigative dogs. And I think you could not get any better dogs in terms of like, to investigate the crime scene than these two. So at least in Europe. So I feel like if they bark at something, it probably means something. I mean, if the dog has done over 200 homicide investigations, I think this dog like pretty much has his stuff, covered pretty well. So it's
It was,
interesting, right?
yeah, it was definitely a weird clue. It definitely, I could see why that would make people think that the McCanns has something to do with it. I'm just trying to think through the rest of it, like how, how many people would have had to be involved in that? So, like, would the McCanns have had to bring the rest of the Tapas seven into the plot? Because otherwise, you would think one of the
I
parents would
don't think
check. I
so.
mean,
I don't think so
eh,
because like if I was like on a on a vacation and someone accidentally does something to their kid and now they're trying to have this whole cover up and they're asking me to be a part of it, like I'm just gonna say like I'll pass on this one, guys. You know what I'm
right.
saying? Especially being a
So,
doctor from UK, having my own kids, I think that's out of the question. Like if it's a cover up, I believe it's only a cover up by the McCann family, but not
so,
by
so,
anyone
so then
else.
how are they proofing against that with the checks? So they were, you know what I mean? You would think that they would insist on doing all the checks of their own children, like, oh, don't worry, we'll just, you guys have had a hard day, we're just going to do all the checks. But instead, they let other parents
Right.
go and
That's
check
interesting.
on.
That's a
Yeah.
very good counter argument that it's hard to explain. Either it's something that had happened. Wait, who was the last person to check on the kids? Was it Kate? What was it her turn to
No,
check on the kids?
well, for the last time, yeah, but there was somebody right before. You know what I mean? So there had been. She wasn't the first one. So there was there
Exactly.
was there was
So
someone. Well, there was Tanner who went up the street before her, but then there was
did did Tanner actually go inside the McCann apartment, and did Tanner confirm that
let me
Madeline
see.
was
So there's
there?
Tanner.
Because I think that's
So
very important.
so there is let's see, Matthew. No, so Matthew. So Madeline's mother says here. Madeline's mother had planned to do it at 9:30, but Matthew Oldfield, who is one of the Tapas Seven, went to go do it when he went to go check on the adjacent apartment where his kids were,
Okay.
and they noticed the bedroom door was wide open. He heard no, but he didn't really go look in. But like I guess the thing is, despite that,
Hmm.
even though he didn't do a good check, if the parents have depended on the guy doing such a half-assed job of it,
Right. If they already knew that.
that
Hmm.
their kid was dead. Like if they're like, I mean, I guess they could be like, he'll go in there and he'll find the kid's dead, and then we'll make a big scene. But instead, it didn't happen. I don't know. It,
Or
it just,
maybe if the parents actually moved the body prior to this whole night out in the bar, and they
yeah,
sort of plotted that someone from the group would actually go and check up on the kids
and
and then
discover.
discover them missing. But once Matthew Oldfield returned to the group feeling casual, like everything is fine, maybe Kate and Gary actually looked at each other and were like, what the hell? Did, did,
like
did
like we
he did he not see that Madeline's not there? And they were like probably thinking to themselves, man, this guy doesn't even look at these kids. So
I feel
Kate,
like I
Kate
feel like
decides to go back into the apartment, and but this is all alleged. I need to
yeah,
mention
yeah.
this all
All
alleged.
well, I mean, this is good that we're sort of wargaming this out. So yeah, I mean, so let's just looking at the last couple cases we did where people had done some sort of like premeditated murder, and then cracked in the aftermath, like mentally couldn't take it. I'm just wondering, like, what would that dinner have been like? I feel like one of the other parents would have said, they seemed a little on edge or a little morose or they seemed different that night. But
Yeah,
nobody's, I haven't really, I mean, admittedly, Wikipedia is far from being a comprehensive resource on those finer points. But like, you would think that would come up. And then the parents have done in the aftermath, they've done like this huge, like, media
for multiple years. For
assault. Yeah, for
yeah,
multiple years. I mean, it's certainly, they don't seem like the sort of people that like relish that kind of attention. Um, I mean,
exactly.
like,
I mean, exactly. That's another good point that they actually still are doing like media to this day and things like that. So if it was a situation where they just tried to cover up the disappearance, if they actually accidentally killed or did something to Madeline, I think they would have stopped after a few years and just try to get a story to die down a little bit, and I guess go on with
yeah,
their lives casually.
like
But
OJ.
like OG
Like
did,
OJ,
exactly.
OJ didn't. Yeah, for all his talk, he didn't really do any big, big investigations after that whole thing.
Nah, he
Especially
was
after he
like,
lost the
yeah.
civil case.
I mean, yeah,
Yeah,
OG seemed like he did exactly what he was supposed to do. You know what I'm saying? But that's another
yeah,
episode. And in terms of like the McCann family, they actually really spent resources, like created funds to find Madeline. So it's
So I mean,
hard. It's hard. It's really hard to like tell what actually happened. The only thing I can say is that during my like research, just like reading like other comments on other YouTube videos, or like just reading like some public opinions, like a lot of people nowadays are sort of to lean back once again to the McCann family, that they actually covered it up. But I guess that's what happened when a kid disappears without a trace for, like there's no traces of this kid found, and also like the safety precautions of the McCanns were definitely quite crappy, to say the least. So I guess I could see why
yeah,
they're getting the blame now.
yeah. I mean, just so like, I mean, the sort of. I know we're coming up to sort of the tail end of the episode, but before we do, I mean, there was a whole host of kind of a motley crew of different creeps and perverts that they pulled out of the woodwork that got blamed. Some of who sued for like libel and slander. So I'm not necessarily going to bring up their names, but a lot of these people either died in the immediate years afterwards, so we'll never know, or in some cases, like there's this one guy who was actually a British Portuguese guy who lived in the area, who had a lot of weird connections and had a lot of associates that had weird connections, and like the phone calls that you mentioned, a lot of weird things that kind of pointed at them, to the point that even like the locals, I think some of the locals lit the car on fire of one of his associates to say, like, and they wrote "speak," to try to convince this person
Yeah,
to fess up to it.
you're talking about the guy that was like super friendly in the aftermath and was like
Yeah,
actually
the
doing
one
like translations for like the.
injecting himself into the case. Yeah,
Oh
his
yeah,
name
yeah,
is
yeah.
Robert Murat, and so like I said, this guy sued for libel, so I'm not accusing him, but yeah, I mean his property,
Yeah.
in his defense, his property has been searched. They've done like the cadaver sniffing stuff. They checked for DNA. They've done radar scanning of his property to see if anything's like. For a while, it looks like they thought that maybe he was a good suspect for it, but nothing has ever turned up
This guy
from
right
it.
here, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I guess essentially, I mean, when you implant yourself in the situation, it would seem suspicious. But maybe he was actually just a good guy trying to
just
help.
trying to help. Yeah, fellow British folks. So yeah, I mean, so there was a bunch of that. There were like there were even like the private investigators from a couple different companies
From
that did
South
really.
Africa, did you heard about that crazy investigator from like South Africa that could allegedly like have like a little piece of DNA of a person and then run through his like some sort of weird
Yeah,
hocus pocus
the
DNA
satellite thing.
machines. Yeah, I
It's
mean that was
nonsense. Yeah,
so like
there was
yeah.
there was that. Yeah, there was that guy. There was like one of the other security companies had people going undercover into like abuse rings, and just they were searching like images, illegal images of children. I don't want to say the word because I don't want us to get flagged. But yeah, just like really awful. awful groups of people that were being infiltrated by these private detectives to see if they could find out. And then, just like the Ben Needham thing, even the Roma got fingered for a while, where they were like, oh, there were rumors that like, this
Yeah.
little girl was turning up in like Morocco and places like that, asking when can I see Mummy again, and just
Then
a
the
lot of
family, actually flown to Morocco, and they didn't really find anything, and they had to leave.
yeah.
I guess without any results. So yeah, I mean, for the McCann family, if they really had nothing to do with the case, with the disappearance, then it's a tragic, tragic way to live. For the next 10 years.
So I have some closing thoughts about
Okay,
this. Just some reactions if it's okay to
perfect.
kind of breach some of those. So a bunch of things. So first, you and I spoke about this before the show. It's worth pointing out that like, gosh, I think it's especially striking that it was kind of a privileged or like well-educated couple that did what seems like a stupid thing, and it's worth pointing out that like had it been like Ben Needham's family, or someone from a lower social class, someone who was someone who was more ignorant would actually be probably taking more blame and maybe would have been blamed earlier. Though obviously some of the vitriol on social media is unwarranted, and nobody needs to pile on to someone's grief. It's worth pointing out, like it reminds me, there's a Warner Brothers cartoon. It's like a Daffy Duck cartoon where, anyway, you see sometimes these things in nature where,
Yeah,
like, like a mother goose will have all of her little goslings behind her, like a mother duck and ducklings, and then a predator, like the ducks looking the wrong way, and
yeah,
a predator will like scoop up like three of them, and it's like, that happens in nature. Like there are animals that prey on the offspring of other animals, and that kind of seems like maybe that's what happened here. And it's interesting that it's like, gosh, they sure did like take a kind of a calculated risk with their kid, and it's like, gosh, seems like those tapas and drinks were pretty expensive, huh? Like boy, you saved on a child, on childcare, saved on a babysitter, and
I
you
don't
lost
think they actually
your
were like.
prize.
I don't think they were like actually trying to save money there. You
Yeah,
know what I'm
just
saying? Because
just lazy or something. I didn't,
I
yeah.
feel like
And
it's either lazy, or I feel like I got the sense that they actually enjoyed that type of setup where someone like goes through all of the kids and checks up on the kids. Maybe it was like, I don't know. Maybe they just like the idea. You know what I'm saying. I
maybe,
definitely don't think they were trying to save money doing that. I think
yeah,
I feel like they had loads of money. You know what I'm
yeah,
saying?
yeah.
Because
Maybe they're just naive or something. Maybe they just had this weird romantic notion that
someone
that
goes
like
and checks on the kids. Yeah,
yeah, because I mean, like to your point, it's not like Britain doesn't have its share of urban crime and
exactly.
problems, and it's like it seems strange that they thought that like Portugal wouldn't also have that because they're in a tourist area. So that part bothers me. Yeah, it bothers me that these are doctors that if someone had come to like her GP office and their toddler had gotten hurt or injured, because of this same kind of neglect,
Yeah,
she probably would have had to report them to the police. So
exactly. All right.
it's kind of strange they did that. I think the other thing is like, I don't know. I have a little bit of a chip on my shoulder about Britain and drinking in general. That it seems like it's a society that spends a lot of their time drinking on their off hours, and
I mean, I don't
and
know.
like,
I don't
I
know
mean, I
about
know
that one.
that's also
Maybe
European. I know that it's not like the rest of Europe doesn't also do that, but like I see a lot of video footage of like, frankly, like I see more people drunk in the streets and like kind of outrageously like passed out than I do in America. And America certainly has its
yeah.
Puritan background, maybe that's why. But in America also has problem drinking for sure. But like, yeah, this is like the second case we've had where a British family, like something happened to a toddler while everybody was out drinking, and it's sort of, I don't know, maybe it's just those are the only ones we hear about, but
Yeah,
it's a little bit strange. And then I guess finally it was interesting that the Portuguese police like they started piling on and blaming the family and they got pretty malicious where they were leaking stuff to the press,
Oh yeah.
like for multiple years. They were leaking stuff to diplomats. Even in the WikiLeaks thing, there's a cable from the American diplomat saying basically the British diplomat was saying that, oh yeah, the McCanns probably did it. That's what we're saying. And then that turned out not to be true. There was a whole bunch of lawsuits.
That's
There was this
interesting.
guy. Yeah, there was, and in fact, one of the guys who was like the head of the investigation on the Portuguese side, he he got in trouble for like a separate investigation of another kid that disappeared, where his detectives, it sounds like, maybe beat a confession out of the family of the kid. So he was
Jeez.
already he was already a little bit notorious for pointing fingers in directions that weren't necessarily true. And then he wrote a book blaming the McCanns, and then he got sued for it, and then he lost the case, and then he appealed, and then he won the appeal, and then it's like kind of back and
It's a
forth.
it's a freaking mess, man. In
Mess,
terms of
yeah.
like this whole case, it's a mess,
But
and yeah,
I guess I guess it's just to finish off my little my little spiel and
yeah,
rant
yeah, of
is
course,
I guess I kind of like, it's interesting that like I can see why the Portuguese police would be resentful, because it's like, gee, British people, like, if you would have just taken care of your kid, maybe nothing terrible would have happened, and we wouldn't be spending all this money and time and this massive headache where there wasn't a headache before for
exactly.
us and the rest of the world. But
Yeah,
then, like, I would also follow it up with, yeah, but it sounds like there was a lot of creepos doing a lot of weird things in that neighborhood. So maybe if you guys had like maybe assigned somebody to that neighborhood to kind of keep like the weirdos from burglarizing it and sexually molesting the guests and things like that, which had happened. So even that very building, that very resort that they were in, there was a former staff member who they think, it was never proven, but they think that this person had sexually assaulted multiple children between the ages of 7 to 10, like a staff member, a British staff member.
jeez,
Yeah, and it's like, okay, so stuff was going on, and it sounds like, if your backyard was catching on fire all the time, you'd probably have somebody watching your backyard, right? So like that's kind of the part that I'm like, yeah, like I understand like the Portuguese, get like annoyed and feel like people are condescending and there's a lot of negative attention, but like also like you maybe weren't doing a great job of taking care of your guests. So
exactly. I mean,
yeah.
that's a good rundown, I guess, of you know, I guess the things that need to be mentioned here. I guess you did a really nice job. I guess there's like you can't put all the blame on the McCann family as well, because the area seemed like it had been, I guess, had its own fair share of like burglaries and I guess even like sexual assault as well. And the McCanns could not have known this, because this is like state documentation or like police files or something like that, so police should have been on top of this, but maybe they were. I didn't find any information that the police force was not like patrolling the general area. I mean, how it's probably really difficult to prevent these things from happening in the first place. If someone is like plotting to snatch up your kid for multiple days, it's probably gonna be like really hard to prevent that. I mean, a good way to prevent something from that, that not happening, is like having child care service people looking after your kids, or
Yeah, an actual
maybe,
babysitter.
think about, this is gonna be a radical idea, but maybe even locking the doors when you leave your toddlers in the house alone. Locking the doors, maybe that's a radical
Yeah.
idea. But maybe even like locking the window or something like that, or maybe not even leaving your kids in the middle of the night. But
Yeah. Maybe have a family dinner. I'll have to point out, like, it was always a pet peeve of mine when like I would be in a restaurant and someone would drag like a young child in there. So like, but then when my wife and I, when we had a toddler,
yeah,
by that same token, we did not burden other adults with our child being there. Like, we spent our time with our child and we just didn't do those things for a few years. So like, that's the part where it's like, okay, I get you're on vacation, but maybe you don't need to do that vacation when everyone's like 2 and 3 years old. You could wait 3 more years and they'll be at an age where they're way more self-service.
Exactly. I mean, well, maybe they were rushing things here. You know what I'm saying? So, I guess we have been running for over an hour now, and I feel like we actually the thought that I had in my head. Maybe one day we can return to this topic and just have a follow up episode with like more of all of the suspects. We could discuss more in depth about them because like there has been what like over like 40 or like 50 people singled out or something like that. So I guess this case is all over the place, so there's no way that you could like fit all of this information in one podcast. But I guess we'll see what happens. So on my end, I pretty much I guess covered everything. And anything you want to I guess mention to our audience before we sign out?
No, that's it. I mean, thank you for all the new subscribers we've seen and for all the new views. We're getting a lot of momentum. We're getting a lot of comments as well, mostly positive. So thank you for that. We love the discussion. Please feel free to keep reaching out to us, and we really appreciate your support.
Right, exactly. So this has been episode number 20, the Madeleine McCann case. And guys, if you enjoyed the episode, leave a comment down below. Maybe we missed some information, which obviously we have because this case is so wide, and this was maybe more of a casual conversation type of a podcast today. And yeah, I guess we spoke our end of the story of like what we actually wanted to mention here. And I guess we'll see you all in episode number 21, so that should be coming out also fairly shortly. And yeah guys, I guess as always, stay safe and we'll catch you on the next episode. Peace out.